Welcome to Revenge Central. Today I will read 2 new crazy revenge stories. If you enjoy this content, please consider subscribing, and let's get started with Story 1. A major fashion brand stole my photo for a global ad campaign. They regret it. This happened about 2 years ago. I'm a freelance nature and travel photographer. I say that like it's some glamorous title, but the reality is, I spend most of my time broke, eating instant ramen in some shithole motel in Patagonia or northern Iceland, waiting for golden hour like some kind of sun-worshipping cultist. I love what I do, don't get me wrong, but it's not the kind of job that makes you rich. It's the kind of job that makes your parents ask when you're going to get a real career, and your bank account ask when you're going to pay rent. I'd been shooting seriously for about 8 years at that point, built up a decent portfolio, had some work published in National Geographic Traveler, a few outdoor magazines, that kind of thing. Nothing that paid the bills on its own, but enough to keep me motivated and build a name in certain circles. The photo in question, the one that started this whole goddamn saga, was taken in Iceland in late September. I'd driven out to a spot called Stokksnes, which is this ridiculous black sand beach with these massive grass-covered dunes and Vestrahorn Mountain looming behind them, like something out of a fantasy novel. I'd scouted the location the day before. Got there at 4:30 in the morning, set up my tripod in the freezing dark. I was shooting with my Sony A7R4, the high-resolution beast, paired with a Sony 16 to 35mm f 2.8 GM lens. For those who don't speak camera nerd, that's a setup worth about $6,500 just for those 2 pieces of gear. Not counting the filters, the tripod, the intervalometer, the spare batteries I'd brought, because cold weather kills battery life like nothing else. The shot I got that morning was, and I'm not being immodest here, genuinely special. The sky had these insane layers, deep purples and burnt oranges bleeding into each other like a bruise. The first light of dawn was just kissing the peak of Vestrahorn, turning the snowcap this almost unreal gold color. The black sand in the foreground was wet from the tide, creating these perfect mirror reflections. I shot it at ISO 100, f11, 1/15 of a second. 3-shot bracket exposure because the dynamic range was absolutely brutal. The sky was way brighter than the foreground. I merged them later in Lightroom, did some careful color grading, a little luminosity masking to bring out the detail in the shadows. The final image was 61 megapixels of pure, unadulterated Icelandic magic. I posted it to my Instagram, posted it to 500px, put it on my website with a clear copyright notice and a licensing page. This wasn't some casual snapshot. This was one of the best images I'd ever taken, and I knew it the moment I reviewed it on my camera's LCD screen, with numb fingers and frozen breath. It got some traction online, not viral traction, but in the photography community, it got noticed, got picked up by a couple of Best Photos of the Week roundups. Someone shared it on a Facebook photography group, and it got like 12,000 likes there. A travel blog featured it as their cover image for a piece on Icelandic road trips. They'd actually paid me $200 for a one-time web license, which felt like a fortune at the time. Felt good. Felt like validation for all those mornings I spent freezing my ass off. Here's the thing about that Facebook group share that becomes important later. The post included my watermark in the corner. Not huge, not obnoxious, but visible. It said Marcus Chen Photography in a clean sans serif font. Anyone who looked at that image for more than 2 seconds could figure out who took it, which makes what happened next even more infuriating. Fast forward about 7 months. I'm sitting in my apartment in Portland, a cramped 1-bedroom that smells like developing fluid and poor decisions, editing a batch of shots from a recent trip to Utah. My phone buzzes, a DM from another photographer I know, guy named Derek who shoots commercial work in New York. "Hey man, is this your shot? Looks like Voss and Sterling is using it." He sent a screenshot. It was from Voss and Sterling's Instagram. For those who don't know, Voss and Sterling is one of those obnoxious luxury fashion brands. Think Gucci meets Supreme meets pretentious bullshit. They sell hoodies that cost $800 and sunglasses that cost $1,200. Their whole brand identity is built on this adventure luxury aesthetic. Like rich people pretending they're rugged explorers while someone else carries their bags. The screenshot showed their latest ad post. Some model standing on a cliff edge, wearing their overpriced puffer jacket, looking wistfully into the distance, and behind the model, blown up and slightly desaturated, was my fucking photo of Vesterhorn. My first reaction was disbelief. I actually laughed. I thought Derek was playing some kind of joke, so I went to Voss and Sterling's Instagram myself, and there it was, front and center on their feed. My mountain, my sky, my composition, my goddamn light. They'd flipped it horizontally, subtle, most people wouldn't notice. But when you've spent hours staring at your own image in post-processing, you know every curve of that mountain, every ripple in that black sand. The flip was obvious to me. They'd also applied a heavy desaturation filter and crunched the blacks a bit to give it that moody editorial look. But underneath all their Instagram filters, it was unmistakably my photograph. I checked the post date. It had been up for 3 days already. Over 200,000 likes, thousands of comments. People in the comments were going on and on about the incredible backdrop and who shot this landscape. Nobody knew it was mine because Voss and Sterling had cropped out my watermark and removed any trace of attribution. The caption was some insufferable nonsense about finding your horizon and the untamed spirit within, the kind of pseudo-philosophical drivel that luxury brands use to sell $900 fleeces to people who've never pitched a tent in their lives. The model in the photo, some guy named Henrik, who I later learned was a semi-famous Danish influencer, was tagged, of course. The photographer who created the entire visual world behind him? Invisible. My hands were shaking, not from excitement, from rage. I took screenshots of everything, the post, the comments, the engagement metrics. I checked their website and found the same image being used in a banner ad on their homepage, checked their other social channels, Facebook, Twitter. This was pre-Elon rebrand, so it was still Twitter, TikTok. The image was everywhere. It was part of their Winter Horizon global campaign. I found it on billboards too. Other photographers started sending me photos they'd taken of Voss and Sterling ads in airports in London, Dubai, Tokyo, and Los Angeles. One guy sent me a photo from inside a Voss and Sterling flagship store on Fifth Avenue in New York. My image printed floor-to-ceiling behind a display of $1,400 quilted jackets. Another sent a shot from a bus shelter ad in Soho. The sheer scale of the theft was staggering. My photo of an Icelandic beach was plastered across the fucking world, selling overpriced clothing to people who could afford it, and I hadn't seen a single dime. Now, here's the thing about being a professional photographer. You develop a pretty thick skin about image theft. It happens all the time. Some blogger uses your image without credit. Some small company puts it on their website. Usually you send a Damanska takedown notice, maybe an invoice for unauthorized usage, and it gets resolved. It's annoying, but it's part of the job. This was different. This was a multi-billion-dollar global brand. This wasn't some mom-and-pop operation that didn't know any better. Voss and Sterling had an entire legal department. They had a creative team. They had procurement processes. Someone, somewhere in that organization, had made a deliberate decision to use my photograph without licensing it. I didn't go nuclear right away. I really didn't. Despite what happened later, my first instinct was to be professional about it. Maybe that was naive. Actually, it was definitely naive. But I genuinely believed that if I just reached out and explained the situation, they'd do the right thing. I found the contact email for their PR department, sent a polite, professional email, attached my original RAW file with EXIF data intact, included a link to my original post with the timestamp, laid out the facts clearly and calmly, asked them to either properly license the image or remove it from all platforms and provide compensation for the unauthorized usage that had already occurred. I got an auto-reply, then nothing for 4 days. On day 5, I got an email from someone named Crystal in their brand partnerships department. It was 3 sentences, basically said, "Thank you for reaching out. We take intellectual property very seriously and are looking into this matter. We'll be in touch." Corporate speak for, "Go fuck yourself. We're hoping you forget about this." I waited another week. Sent a follow-up email, got another copy-paste response from Crystal. Different words, same energy. "Your concern has been escalated to our legal team. Please allow 10 to 15 business days for a resolution. 15 business days came and went. Radio silence. Meanwhile, their campaign was still running. My photo was still up. They'd even expanded it. Now there were video ads using my still image as a backdrop with text overlays. I was watching my own work generate millions of dollars in revenue for a company that couldn't be bothered to reply to my emails. I called their main corporate number, got put through to a receptionist who transferred me to voicemail for someone in communications, left a message, never got a call back. I tried reaching out to the creative director on LinkedIn. He'd recently posted some pretentious quote about authenticity in visual storytelling. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a goddamn steak knife. My connection request got ignored. At this point, 6 weeks had passed since I first discovered the theft. The campaign was winding down, but the damage was done. My image had been seen by an estimated 50 million people worldwide. I calculated this based on their social media impressions, billboard locations, and web traffic data from SimilarWeb. 50 million views. And I was still eating ramen. I was starting to feel that special kind of fury that only comes from being completely powerless against a massive corporation. The kind where you lie awake at night running through scenarios in your head, imagining the things you'd say if you could get someone from that company in a room and make them listen. That's when my friend Mira entered the picture. Mira is a former investigative journalist turned media consultant. She worked at one of the big networks for a decade before getting sick of the corporate bullshit and going independent. She specializes in crisis communications, but from the outside. She helps regular people fight back against companies that screw them over. She once helped a nurse who was wrongfully terminated for reporting safety violations get a settlement that made the hospital's board of directors look like a pack of idiots on national television. She's brilliant, ruthless, and absolutely terrifying in the best possible way. When I told her I was thinking about just eating the loss, she literally said, "Absolutely the fuck not. Call me back when you're done feeling sorry for yourself." We'd known each other since college. She'd actually bought one of my prints at a gallery show a few years back, one of my waterfall shots from Oregon. We kept in touch. When I told her what was happening, she was immediately interested. "Send me everything," she said when we talked on the phone. "Every email, every screenshot, every piece of documentation you have." I spent an entire day organizing everything into a folder. Original RAW files, JPEG exports, screenshots of their Instagram posts, screenshots of their website, photos that other people had sent me of their billboards and ads in various cities, copies of every email I'd sent them and their non-responses, my original social media posts with timestamps, my copyright registration, because yes, I had registered the copyright for that image with the US Copyright Office. More on that later, because it turned out to be crucial. I sent it all to Mira via a secure cloud folder. She spent 2 days going through it. Then she called me back. "Okay," she said. "Here's what I think. You have a rock-solid case. The EXIF data is clean, the timestamps are undeniable, and you have copyright registration which gives you serious legal leverage. But here's the problem. If you just sue them, they'll drag it out for years. They have deeper pockets than God. They'll bury you in legal fees before you ever see a courtroom. So what's the alternative?" I asked. "We make it more expensive for them to ignore you than to settle," she said. "We go public, but we do it smart. We don't just complain on Twitter, we build a narrative. We create content that's so compelling and so well documented that journalists pick it up on their own. We make this the kind of story that writes itself." She laid out a plan. It was methodical, strategic, and honestly, a little terrifying. But I was past the point of being reasonable. These people had stolen my work, ignored me for weeks, and treated me like I was invisible. Fuck being reasonable. Phase 1 was documentation. Mira wanted me to compile a comprehensive dossier. Not just the basics I'd already gathered, but everything. She wanted a forensic-level breakdown of the image usage. I went deep. I used reverse image search tools, TinEye, Google Images, Yandex, to find every single instance of my photograph being used by Voss and Sterling or their affiliates. I found the image on 47 different web pages across 14 countries. I found it in email marketing campaigns that people had forwarded to me. I found it in a promotional video that was still live on YouTube with 3.2 million views. I created a detailed timeline. Original photograph taken, September 28th. First posted online, October 2nd. First appearance in Voss and Sterling's campaign, May 15th, approximately 7 months later. That gap was important because it showed this wasn't some accident. Someone had gone looking for an image, found mine, and deliberately chosen to use it without contacting me. I also did a technical analysis. I compared my original file with the version they were using. The flip was obvious, but there were other modifications too. They'd cropped about 5% from the top, added a blue color cast, and applied some heavy vignetting. The changes were clearly designed to make the image less identifiable as mine. In copyright law, this is actually relevant. It shows consciousness of guilt. They knew they were using someone else's work, and they tried to obscure the source. But the EXIF data... Oh, the EXIF data! This is where it gets beautiful. When I exported the version I'd posted online, I'd stripped most of the EXIF data, because that's standard practice. You don't want to broadcast your camera settings and GPS coordinates to the world. But I'd left a few key metadata fields intact, including the copyright tag, which contained my name and the year. Here's the thing about image metadata. When someone downloads a JPEG from Instagram or 500px, they don't get the original file. They get a compressed, re-encoded version. But sometimes, depending on the platform and the download method, fragments of the original metadata survive. It's like digital archaeology. The data gets compressed and mangled, but traces remain. I ran their version of the image through EXIF tool, which is this incredibly powerful metadata analysis software, and buried in the bowels of the file, in a field that most people don't even know exists, was a fragment of my original copyright tag. It was garbled, Topure, Mar, instead of Topure Marcus Chen 2023, but it was there. A fossil of my ownership, embedded in their stolen version. That was the smoking gun. That fragment proved that their version was derived from my original file, not from some coincidentally similar photograph. In a courtroom, that's devastating evidence. But we weren't going to court, not yet, anyway. Mira had other plans. Phase 2 was the public records request. This was Mira's stroke of genius. Voss and Sterling's billboard campaign wasn't just slapped up randomly. In most major cities, outdoor advertising requires permits, and permits are public records. If you know where to look and how to ask, you can get a treasure trove of information about who approved what, when, and through what process. Mira had experience with this from her investigative journalism days. She knew exactly which municipal departments to contact in each city where the billboards had appeared. She drafted FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests, and their equivalents in other countries. She targeted New York, Los Angeles, London, Tokyo, and Dubai. Most of these requests came back with basic permit information. Which company applied for the permit? What size the billboard was? How long the campaign was approved for? Standard stuff. But the New York request, the one through the Department of Buildings, came back with something unexpected. Attached to the permit application was a correspondence chain between Voss and Sterling's advertising agency and the city. And buried in that chain was an internal email from someone at Voss and Sterling's creative department to their ad agency. The email, dated April 28th, roughly 2.5 weeks before the campaign launched, said this. Attached are the final hero images for the Winter Horizon campaign. Please note that image VHS Iceland-07 was sourced from an external photographer and we are still finalizing licensing. Please proceed with production and we will confirm license terms before go live. If there are any issues, we have backup options ready. Let me unpack why this email was absolutely nuclear. First, it confirmed that they knew the image belonged to an external photographer. They knew damn well it wasn't theirs. They weren't confused about the provenance of the image. Someone in their organization had found my photo, flagged it for use, and made a conscious decision to include it in a global campaign before securing the rights. Second, the phrase, "we are still finalizing licensing," was corporate speak for, "we haven't asked for permission yet, and we're hoping it'll work out." There was no license being finalized. There was no negotiation happening. They were just going to use it and figure it out later. Third, the mention of backup options proved premeditation. They knew there was a risk that the actual photographer might object. They had contingencies. They just didn't give enough of a shit to use them. Mira practically screamed when she read that email. Not in a bad way. In a holy shit, this is exactly what we needed way. That email is worth its weight in gold, she told me. It proves intent. It proves knowledge. It proves they went ahead anyway. Any jury in the world would look at that and see a company that deliberately stole intellectual property. We had our ammunition. Now it was time to load the gun. Phase 3 was content creation. Mira and I spent a weekend at my apartment building what she called the narrative package. This was a collection of social media posts, a long-form blog post, and a video that would serve as the foundation of the public pressure campaign. The centerpiece was a side-by-side comparison. My original photograph on the left, their version on the right. Below it, a detailed breakdown of the modifications they'd made. The flip, the crop, the color changes, the desaturation. Below that, the EXIF data comparison showing the surviving copyright fragment. And below that, the internal email. Mira insisted I write the blog post myself. People can smell PR, she said. This has to come from you. Raw, authentic, pissed off. Don't polish it. Don't make it sound like a press release. Write like you're telling a friend what happened over a beer, except the friend is the entire internet. So I did. I wrote it in one sitting. About 4,000 words of pure, unfiltered fury. I documented everything. The photograph, the discovery, the ignored emails, the silent phone calls, the corporate runaround. I included the technical details because photographers would care about that stuff, and photographers were going to be my first and most passionate allies. I titled it, How Voss and Sterling Stole My Photograph, Ignored Me for 6 weeks, and Hoped I'd Just Go Away. The video was simpler but arguably more powerful. I set up my camera in my apartment, not the fancy Sony, just my iPhone, and talked directly to the camera for about 12 minutes. No script, no teleprompter. Just me, looking tired and angry, explaining what had happened. I showed the original RAW file on my computer screen, zoomed in on the EXIF data, showed the timestamp, showed the copyright registration, showed their version side by side with mine, showed the internal email. I walked through everything methodically, like I was presenting evidence to a jury. Mira reviewed everything before we went live. She made a few suggestions, mostly about timing and platform strategy. She wanted me to post the blog first, then the video, then the social media content, with specific delays between each to maximize impact. Monday morning, she said, that's when journalists are looking for stories. You post the blog at 6 a.m. Eastern. Video goes up at noon. Social posts at 3 p.m. By Tuesday morning, this should be on every tech and culture desk in the country. I was nervous as hell. I'd spent my entire career behind the camera, not in front of it. I wasn't a public speaker. I wasn't an activist. I was a dude who took pictures of mountains. But these people had pushed me too far. Monday, June 24th, 5:58 a.m. I was sitting at my desk with my finger hovering over the publish button on my blog. The coffee was cold because I'd been sitting there for an hour psyching myself up. I hit publish. The blog post went live on my personal website. I immediately shared the link on my Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook with a brief caption. A $4.2 billion fashion brand stole my photograph for their global ad campaign and ignored every attempt I made to resolve it. Here's the full story, with receipts. Then I waited. Nothing happened for about 45 minutes. I was refreshing my analytics every 30 seconds like a maniac. Then my Instagram notifications started going crazy. Other photographers had seen the post and were sharing it. The photography community is tight-knit and absolutely vicious when it comes to image theft. They live with this crap every day, and most of them are powerless to fight back. Within 2 hours, the post had been shared by several large photography accounts. One account with 2 million followers posted the side-by-side comparison with the caption, "Another day, another massive corporation stealing from artists." That post alone got 300,000 likes in 6 hours. At noon, I posted the video, YouTube and Instagram TV simultaneously. 12 minutes of me looking like a disheveled mess, holding up printouts of evidence, showing my computer screen, and explaining in very plain, very angry terms exactly what Voss and Sterling had done. The video hit 100,000 views on YouTube in its first 4 hours. The Instagram version did even better, 500,000 views by that evening. By 3 p.m., when I posted the social media content, a thread on Twitter with the full timeline and evidence, the story had already started spreading beyond the photography community. Tech journalists had picked it up. A reporter from The Verge DM'd me. Someone from Wired sent an email. By Tuesday morning, it was everywhere. The Verge ran a story, Wired ran a story, Petapixel, the biggest photography news site, ran a story with the headline, "Luxury fashion brand Voss & Sterling caught using stolen photograph in global campaign." Gizmodo, Mashable, TechCrunch, and Ars Technica all followed within hours. The Petapixel article was particularly devastating because they did their own analysis. They independently verified the EXIF data. They contacted photography experts who confirmed the image manipulation. They reached out to Voss & Sterling for comment and got the same kind of non-answer I'd been getting. "We are aware of the claims being made and are investigating the matter internally." Petapixel actually published a follow-up piece that was essentially, "Yeah, we checked, and the photographer is 100% right. Here's our independent technical analysis." That piece included a pixel-level comparison, showing how the flipped, cropped version was a direct derivative of my original. No reasonable person could look at it and conclude anything other than theft. The story had momentum now. It had escaped my control and taken on a life of its own. That was exactly what Mira had wanted. But here's the thing about going viral. It's not just journalists who notice, it's everyone, including other people who've been screwed over by the same company. Within 48 hours of my first post, I started hearing from other photographers. 3 of them, independently, reached out to say that Voss & Sterling had also used their work without permission. One was a landscape photographer from Norway, whose image of the Lofoten Islands had appeared in a Voss & Sterling store display in Milan. Another was a wildlife photographer from South Africa, whose photo of a leopard had been used in one of their email campaigns. A third was a street photographer from Tokyo, whose image of a rain-soaked alleyway had shown up in a Voss & Sterling pop-up shop. 3 additional photographers. 3 additional instances of theft. Same pattern. No credit, no compensation, no response to inquiries. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a business practice. I connected all 3 photographers with Mira. She was practically vibrating with excitement. "This is a pattern," she said. "This changes everything. This isn't just about your photo anymore. This is about systemic intellectual property theft by a major corporation." We coordinated. All 4 of us agreed to share our stories simultaneously. Each of us published a post on our own platforms on the same day, cross-linking to each other. Mira drafted a joint statement that we all endorsed, calling on Voss & Sterling to account for what appeared to be a pattern of unauthorized image usage. The coordinated release was a nuclear strike on the brand's reputation. The New York Times picked it up. So did the BBC. The Guardian ran a long-form piece that was scathingly critical of Voss & Sterling's corporate culture. CNN did a segment. Bloomberg published an analysis piece about the financial implications for the brand. The hashtag Voss & Sterling Stolen started trending on Twitter. It trended in the United States, the United Kingdom, Japan, and Australia. At its peak, it had over 200,000 posts. And then, the sponsors started paying attention. Voss & Sterling, like most luxury brands, had a network of brand ambassadors and sponsored partners. Influencers, celebrities, athletes who were paid to wear their clothing and promote their products. These people had their own brands to protect, and being associated with a company that was publicly shamed for stealing from artists was not a good look. The first domino fell on a Thursday, 9 days after my initial post. A well-known professional surfer who had a sponsorship deal with Voss & Sterling posted a statement on Instagram saying she was deeply troubled by the allegations and was suspending her partnership with the brand pending a full investigation. Within 24 hours, 2 more ambassadors followed. Then a famous musician who'd been the face of their previous campaign posted a cryptic but clearly pointed message about supporting artists, not exploiting them. The subtext was unmistakable. By the end of the second week, 7 of Voss and Sterling's 12 official brand ambassadors had publicly distanced themselves from the company. 3 had terminated their contracts entirely. The financial implications were significant. Those endorsement deals were worth millions collectively, and more importantly, the optics were catastrophic. The brand's stock price, they're publicly traded, which was another thing that made them vulnerable, dropped 8% over the course of 2 weeks. In the luxury fashion space, where brand perception is everything, an 8% drop based on a PR scandal is basically a 5-alarm fire. Their CEO, a guy named Richard Calloway, silver-haired, perpetually tan, the kind of man who wears cashmere sweaters to board meetings and calls himself a visionary in his own press releases, finally broke his silence. He gave an interview to Vogue Business in which he said the company took these allegations very seriously and was conducting an internal review. He deflected blame to their advertising agency, suggesting that a third-party vendor had been responsible for image sourcing and that Voss and Sterling had inadequate oversight of their vendors' practices. The guy's salary that year was $8.4 million, by the way, just for context on the kind of oversight his company could afford. It was a classic corporate blame-shifting move. Throw the ad agency under the bus, claim ignorance, promise to do better. Mira and I saw right through it. The internal email we published directly contradicts this, Mira told a reporter from the Financial Times. The email shows that Voss and Sterling's own creative department sourced the image, acknowledged that licensing hadn't been finalized, and instructed the ad agency to proceed anyway. This wasn't a vendor problem. This was a corporate culture problem. The Financial Times ran that quote. Alongside it, they published a piece analyzing Voss and Sterling's supply chain practices that revealed several other instances of the company cutting corners or exploiting creatives. The narrative was shifting from one photographer's complaint to a pattern of corporate exploitation. I was simultaneously exhilarated and terrified. I'd set something in motion that was way bigger than me now. The internet rage machine was fully engaged, and I was at the center of it. Every day brought new developments, new reporters wanting interviews, new photographers reaching out with their own stories. Through all of this, Voss and Sterling's legal team had been conspicuously silent. They hadn't sent me a cease and desist. They hadn't threatened to sue me for defamation. They hadn't done anything, which was itself telling. If they had a legitimate defense, they would have deployed it. The silence meant they didn't have one. But I wasn't just relying on public pressure. Behind the scenes, I'd hired a lawyer. His name was David Park, and he came recommended by Mira. He was an intellectual property attorney based in San Francisco who specialized in copyright infringement cases against major corporations. He'd handled cases against tech companies, movie studios, and publishing houses. He was expensive, like really expensive. But he agreed to take my case on a contingency basis after reviewing the evidence. The copyright registration is the key here, he told me during our first call. You registered the image before the infringement occurred, which means you're eligible for statutory damages under U.S. copyright law. That's up to $150,000 per willful infringement. And this was clearly willful. They had actual knowledge that the image belonged to someone else, as proven by their own internal email. David sent a formal demand letter to Voss and Sterling's general counsel on July 15th. It was 14 pages long and it was a thing of beauty. It detailed every instance of unauthorized use, calculated the commercial value of the campaign, cited relevant case law, and demanded a specific settlement figure. I'm not going to share the exact number because of the NDA I eventually signed, but I'll say this. It was substantial. It was the kind of number that makes a corporate lawyer sit up straight in their Herman Miller chair. The demand letter gave them 21 days to respond. For the first 2 weeks, nothing. More silence, more games. The public pressure campaign was still running. I'd continued posting updates, sharing new evidence as I found it, and amplifying the stories of the other photographers who'd come forward. Then, on day 18, I got a call from David. "They want to talk," he said. "They've retained a law firm in New York, Morrison & Forster, big outfit, and they've requested a settlement conference. They want to do it virtually, and they want it done before the demand letter deadline expires." The settlement conference was scheduled for August 7th. I remember that morning vividly. I'd barely slept. I'd put on a button-down shirt for the first time in months, and Mira had to tell me to take it off because I looked like a kid going to a job interview. She told me to wear a plain black t-shirt instead. "Look like yourself," she said. "You're not a corporate lawyer. You're the guy they stole from. Own that." It was conducted via Zoom, which felt absurdly anticlimactic for something this consequential. On my side, me, David Park, and Mira, who attended as my media advisor, which made the other side visibly uncomfortable. On their side, 2 lawyers from Morrison & Forster, a PR executive from Voss & Sterling, and some poor junior associate who looked like he wanted to be literally anywhere else. David opened strong. He walked through the evidence methodically: the image comparison, the EXIF data, the internal email, the public records, the testimony of 3 additional photographers, the media coverage, the sponsor defections, the stock price impact. He presented it all with the calm, clinical precision of a surgeon. When he finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the call. Then one of their lawyers, a woman in her 50s with an impressively neutral expression, spoke. "We acknowledge that the image was used without proper licensing. Voss & Sterling takes full responsibility for this oversight and wants to make things right with Mr. Chen." Oversight, that word. As if someone had accidentally left the stove on, not deliberately stolen a man's creative work, and ignored his attempts to seek justice for 2 months. David didn't let it slide. Your client's own internal email, which was obtained through a lawful public records request, demonstrates that this was not an oversight. It was a deliberate decision to proceed with using an image despite knowing that licensing had not been secured. Your client then ignored Mr. Chen's repeated attempts to resolve the matter privately for over 6 weeks. Your client only expressed interest in making things right after Mr. Chen's public disclosure of the facts led to a global media scandal. The PR executive shifted in his seat. The lawyers exchanged glances. The negotiation lasted 4 hours. 4 hours of going back and forth on numbers, on terms, on language. David was relentless. He'd prepared a detailed damages model that calculated the commercial value of my image based on the campaign's reach, the brand's typical licensing fees, the duration and scope of the unauthorized use, and the statutory damages available under copyright law. Their side tried several tactics. They argued that the actual commercial value of the image was low because it was just a background element in the ads. David shot that down by showing that the image was the dominant visual element in every piece of campaign creative. It wasn't a background, it was the hero image. They tried to argue that the public disclosure had caused them reputational harm that should offset some of the damages. David pointed out that the reputational harm was entirely self-inflicted, and that I had made every reasonable attempt to resolve the matter privately before going public. They tried to argue that the other photographers' claims should be handled separately. David agreed, but pointed out that the existence of a pattern of behavior was relevant to establishing willfulness, which directly affected the damages calculation. At one point, the PR executive, clearly not a lawyer, clearly out of his depth, tried to appeal to my sense of fairness. He said something about how the campaign had been intended to celebrate the natural world, and that my photograph had been chosen because it was so beautiful and inspiring. I almost lost it. Mira put a hand on my arm under the table. David responded calmly. My client's photograph was not chosen in any meaningful sense. It was taken without permission, used without compensation, and your client attempted to cover their tracks by modifying the image and stripping metadata. No amount of aesthetic appreciation excuses theft. In the end, they agreed to a settlement. It included a cash payment that was, and I'm being deliberately vague here because of the NDA, enough to fundamentally change my financial situation. Let's just say I won't be eating ramen anytime soon unless I want to. A retroactive licensing agreement that acknowledged my authorship of the photograph and granted Voss & Sterling limited, non-exclusive rights to use the image for a specific period, with the understanding that this was a settlement term and not a voluntary license. A public statement of apology, published on Voss & Sterling's website and social media channels, acknowledging the unauthorized use and expressing regret. The first draft they proposed was so mealy-mouthed and non-apologetic that David rejected it out of hand. It took 3 more drafts before they produced something that could charitably be called an apology. a commitment to overhaul their image sourcing and licensing practices, including the hiring of a dedicated intellectual property compliance officer. This was largely a PR move, but it was written into the settlement as a binding commitment. Payment of all my legal fees, and a clause preventing either party from speaking publicly about the settlement terms, which is why I'm being careful about specific numbers here. But the existence of the settlement itself is a matter of public record. The public statement was published on August 22nd. It read, in part, Voss and Sterling sincerely apologizes to Marcus Chen for the unauthorized use of his photograph in our Winter Horizon campaign. We take full responsibility for this failure. Mr. Chen's work is exceptional, and he deserved to be properly credited and compensated from the outset. We are implementing comprehensive changes to our creative sourcing process to ensure this does not happen again. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the kind of groveling public apology that the internet wanted. But it was something. It was an admission, from a multi-billion-dollar corporation to a freelance photographer they'd tried to ignore into oblivion. The media coverage of the settlement was extensive. Most outlets framed it as a landmark victory for individual creators against corporate IP theft. Petapixel called it the most significant photographer victory against a major brand in recent memory. The Verge ran a piece about what it meant for the broader creator economy. The New York Times included it in a roundup of notable legal settlements for the year. But you know what the best part was? Not the money. Not the media coverage. Not even the apology. The best part was the message I got from a young photographer. A kid, really. Maybe 22 years old. A week after the settlement was announced. She'd just graduated from photography school and was trying to build a career as a freelance travel photographer. She told me that my story had inspired her to register the copyrights for all of her images and to stand up for herself when a local tourism board had used one of her photos without permission. I was going to just let it go, she wrote. But after seeing what you did, I sent them an invoice, and they paid it. That's the real victory. Not just for me, but for every photographer, every artist, every creator who's ever had their work stolen by someone who assumed they were too small and too powerless to fight back. I also want to address something that came up a lot in the comments and DMs I received during all of this. A lot of people, and I mean a lot, told me I should have just been grateful for the exposure, that my photo being seen by millions of people was its own reward. That I should have taken the brand's attention as a compliment and used it to build my career. To everyone who said that, go fuck yourselves. Seriously. Exposure doesn't pay my rent. Exposure doesn't cover my gear insurance. Exposure doesn't reimburse me for the thousands of dollars I spend every year on travel, equipment, and the countless unpaid hours I invest in perfecting my craft. Exposure is what corporations offer when they want to get something for nothing. It's a word that should make every creative professional's skin crawl. Voss and Sterling had a marketing budget for that campaign that industry insiders estimated at north of $15 million. $15 million for a global ad campaign, and they couldn't carve out a few grand to properly license the single most striking visual element of the whole thing? Give me a break. They stole from me not because they couldn't afford to pay, but because they calculated, correctly, in most cases, that individual creators wouldn't have the resources or the nerve to fight back. I had the nerve. And with Mira and David's help, I had the resources. Now, let me share some lessons from this experience, because if you're a creative professional reading this, you need to hear them. First, register your copyrights. I cannot stress this enough. In the United States, you cannot sue for statutory damages or attorney's fees for copyright infringement unless your work is registered with the Copyright Office before the infringement occurs, or within 3 months of publication. Registration is cheap, $55 per work, or even less if you register a collection. It takes 10 minutes online. Do it for every single image you care about. It is the single most important legal protection you have. I had registered my Vesterhorn image as part of a collection of 50 photographs about 2 months after I took it. That registration was what made my case so powerful. Without it, I would have been limited to proving actual damages, which are notoriously difficult to calculate and usually much lower than statutory damages. With registration, I was eligible for up to $150,000 per willful infringement. That's a very different conversation to have with a corporate legal team. Second, keep your metadata. I know a lot of photographers strip all EXIF data before posting online, and I understand the impulse. You don't want to share camera settings or location data, but at minimum, preserve the copyright field. Embed your name, your website, and the year in the image metadata before you export for web. It creates a trail. Even when platforms recompress your files, fragments of that data can survive, as my case demonstrated. Third, document everything. Every version of your image, every time you post it, every timestamp, every interaction with anyone who expresses interest in using it. Build a paper trail. When something goes wrong, and eventually, something will, that documentation is your armor. Fourth, don't be afraid to go public. I spent 6 weeks trying to resolve this privately. 6 weeks of polite emails, professional phone calls, and patient waiting. And in return, I got nothing but silence and condescension. The moment I went public, everything changed. Not because I was unreasonable or aggressive, but because corporations only respond to things that affect their bottom line. Public pressure affects their bottom line. I know there's a lot of advice out there telling creatives to be professional and not burn bridges. And sure, there's something to that. But there's a difference between being professional and being a doormat. Being professional means being clear, factual, and persistent. It doesn't mean being silent when someone steals from you. Fifth, build a community before you need one. The reason my story went viral wasn't just because it was compelling, although it was. It was because I had a network of fellow photographers and supporters who amplified it. I'd spent years engaging genuinely with the photography community online, sharing knowledge, supporting other artists, and building real relationships. When I needed help, those people showed up. They shared my post. They vouched for my credibility. They added their voices to mine. No one achieves anything like this alone. Sixth, get professional help. Mira was invaluable. David was indispensable. Trying to navigate a fight like this by yourself, especially against a well-resourced corporation, is like bringing a knife to a tank battle. There are people out there who specialize in exactly this kind of situation. Find them, hire them. It's an investment, not an expense. In the 2 years since all of this happened, my career has changed in ways I never expected. The exposure from the media coverage brought in a flood of licensing inquiries, gallery show invitations, and workshop bookings. I've given talks about photographers' rights at conferences and photography schools. I even consulted on a piece of legislation in Oregon that strengthens protections for freelance visual artists against copyright infringement. But the thing I'm most proud of is simpler than all of that. It's the fact that I didn't back down when a $4 billion company told me, implicitly through their silence, that I didn't matter, that my work was theirs to take, that a single freelance photographer was too insignificant to warrant a response. I refused to accept that. I'm not a superhero. I'm not a legal expert. I'm not a media strategist. I'm just a guy who takes pictures of mountains and beaches and sunrises. I got lucky. Lucky that I'd registered my copyright. Lucky that the EXIF fragment survived. Lucky that Mira knew how to file public records requests. Lucky that David was willing to take my case. But luck only gets you so far. The rest was stubbornness. Pure, irrational, bone-deep stubbornness. The kind of stubbornness that makes you keep sending emails when no one replies. The kind that makes you spend your own money on legal fees when you can barely afford groceries. The kind that makes you stare into a camera and tell the entire internet your story, even though your hands are shaking, and you're pretty sure you're going to regret it. Voss and Sterling thought I was nobody. They thought they could take my work, use it to sell their overpriced garbage to the world, and I'd just disappear. Fade into the background noise of the internet, like all the other photographers they'd probably ripped off over the years. They were wrong. To any photographer, any artist, any creator who's reading this and thinking about that, one time someone used your work without permission, and you just let it go because it wasn't worth the fight, I'm telling you right now, it's worth the fight. Your work has value, your rights matter, and these corporations rely on your silence. They need your silence. Because the moment you speak up, the whole house of cards starts to wobble. I'm not saying every case will end with a massive settlement. Most won't. The legal system is stacked in favor of people and companies with resources, and that sucks. But even a small victory, a corrected credit, a modest payment, a public acknowledgement, chips away at the culture of casual theft that's become so pervasive in the digital age. Every time a creator stands up for their rights, it makes it a little bit harder for the next corporation to justify stealing. Every public case adds to the precedent, adds to the awareness, adds to the pressure on legislators and courts to take intellectual property rights seriously. So register your copyrights, keep your metadata, document everything, and when someone steals your work, and someone will, don't let them get away with it. You're not too small, your work is not too insignificant, and you are not alone. One more thing. After the settlement, I went back to Iceland. Same beach, same mountain, same time of year. I set up my tripod in the dark. I waited for the light. I took a new photograph of Vesterhorn. Different conditions, different sky, different mood, but the same mountain, the same sand. The same place that had given me the image that changed my life. That new photograph is now one of my best-selling prints, and unlike the last time, every single use of it is properly licensed, credited, and compensated. Because I learned my lesson, and I hope Voss and Sterling learned theirs. If you made it this far, thanks for reading. This was long as hell, and I probably could have said it in half the words. But honestly, I wanted every detail out there. I want this to be the most thoroughly documented case of corporate image theft on the internet. I want it to be the first thing that comes up when some executive at some brand thinks about using a photographer's work without permission. I want them to see this story and think, maybe we should just pay for the license. Because that's really all I ever wanted. Just pay for the fucking license. Story 2. The mega influencer who stole my content for years, and how I broke her empire. There is a particular kind of violence that happens in silence. Not the loud, dramatic kind you see in movies, with shattered glass and screaming matches. No, this is the quiet sort. The sort that happens while you sleep, while you eat breakfast, while you're walking your dog through the park, and thinking about absolutely nothing at all. Someone, somewhere, is taking something that belongs to you. And they are calling it theirs. I found out on a Tuesday. Tuesdays, I've decided, are the cruelest days for revelations. Mondays are too obvious, Wednesdays have their own momentum, but Tuesdays sneak up on you with the dull thud of inevitability. I was sitting in my apartment in Portland, which is the kind of apartment where the radiator sounds like a sleeping dragon, and the walls are the color of old cream. I had my tablet propped on my knees, and I was scrolling through Instagram with the particular aimlessness of someone who should be working but isn't. My name is Margot, I'm an illustrator. I've been drawing since I could hold a crayon, which is the sort of thing everyone says, but in my case happens to be literally true. My mother has a photo of me at 14 months, clutching a red crayon like a tiny sword, having drawn what appears to be either a dog or a very ambitious potato on the living room wall. I make art about small, strange things. A moth caught in a teacup. A woman whose hair is made of fog. A fox wearing reading glasses, examining a map of a city that doesn't exist. A clock with no hands, sitting in an empty train station, waiting for a train that will never arrive, because time, in that particular painting, has decided to go elsewhere. My style is, well, I don't like describing my own style. It feels like trying to describe the way you breathe. But others have called it ethereal gothic whimsy, which sounds like a candle scent at a store that sells crystals, but I'll take it. A gallery owner in the Pearl District once told me my work reminded her of what Edward Gorey would paint if he'd been raised on Studio Ghibli and chronic insomnia, which I thought was lovely and also slightly concerning. I had about 12,000 followers on Instagram. Not nothing, not something that was going to buy me a house, but enough to sell prints, enough to get occasional freelance work, enough to feel like I was part of a conversation. I posted regularly. I engaged with my community. I poured myself into every piece like I was wringing out a sponge. And on that Tuesday, while scrolling with one finger like some modern-day Sisyphus pushing his boulder up a hill made of algorithmic sludge, I saw my work. Not credited, not shared, not even screenshotted with a "Look at this amazing artist" caption. Posted as someone else's. By someone named Serafina Lux. Serafina Lux had 5 million followers. 5 million. That number is so large it becomes abstract. It's the population of a small country. It's the number of grains in a handful of sand, except each grain is a human being who has voluntarily chosen to look at this person's content. Her bio read, "Artist and creator. Bringing magic to your feed daily. 5M strong collaborations. Serafina at luxorcreative.co." The post was one of my illustrations, a particular piece I called "The Telephone Box at the End of the Universe." It showed a red telephone box overgrown with bioluminescent moss, its door slightly ajar, revealing a swirling cosmos inside. I had spent 3 weeks on it, 3 weeks of layering and shading and second-guessing every single pixel. Serafina had posted it with the caption, "New piece." Sometimes I feel like I'm standing at the edge of everything, just waiting for the call that never comes. What do you think, lovelies? Art #illustration, #art #illustration, #surreally digital art, else on Instagram, #creative, #magic, #dreamy. The comments were a river of adoration. "You're so talented, Serafina. This is your best work yet. I literally cried looking at this. How do you keep getting better?" There was no tag, no credit, no inspired by, just pure, unadulterated theft, presented with the confidence of someone who has never once questioned their own right to take. My first reaction was not anger. I want to be clear about that. My first reaction was a strange, floating sensation, like the floor had become slightly less solid beneath my feet. I stared at the post. I stared at it the way you stare at a car accident, with that awful mixture of fascination and horror. Then I clicked on her profile, and I kept clicking, and clicking, and clicking. I want to say that what I found over the next 4 hours was surprising. But the truth is, once you start looking for something, the world rearranges itself to show you what was always there. It's like buying a red car and suddenly seeing red cars everywhere, except instead of cars, it's your entire creative output, scattered across someone else's feed like confetti at a parade you weren't invited to. The first post I found was from 11 months ago. A piece I called "The Lighthouse Keeper's Daughter," a girl standing on a cliff, her dress made of waves, her eyes glowing faintly amber, posted by Serafina, with the caption, "Inspired by a dream I had about the ocean." 11 months. She'd been doing this for nearly a year, at least. That was just the earliest post I could find before my scrolling thumb developed a repetitive stress injury. I started a spreadsheet. I know that sounds clinical. I know that sounds like the act of someone who has already moved past the emotional phase and into the strategic one. And maybe I had. Maybe there's something about seeing your soul laid bare on someone else's page that accelerates you through the stages of grief like a time-lapse video of a flower dying. The spreadsheet had columns: date posted, by me; date posted, by Serafina; platform, piece title, description, alterations made, engagement, mine; engagement, hers, sponsorship tag. That last column was the one that made me feel physically ill. Because Serafina wasn't just stealing my art. She was monetizing it, heavily. Every third or fourth post was tagged with a brand partnership, a fashion label, a makeup company, a tech brand, a subscription box service. Each sponsored post used my artwork as the visual hook, the thing that stopped people from scrolling, and then pivoted seamlessly into a sales pitch. She was making money, significant money, the kind of money that I, with my 12,000 followers and my day job at a frame shop, could only describe in fairy tale terms: gold coins, dragon hoards, the wealth of small nations locked in a tower. I called my friend Nadia. Nadia is a copyright lawyer, which is the kind of practical, useful profession that artists rarely have in their inner circles but desperately need. She specializes in intellectual property disputes involving digital media, which is a fancy way of saying she spends her days fighting people who steal things on the internet and then claim it was fair use. Nadia and I met in college when she accidentally sat on my portfolio case, and I accidentally yelled at her in a way that somehow led to a 10-year friendship. She still has a faint indentation on the back of one of my earliest sketchbooks from that incident. It looks, appropriately enough, like a bruise. "You need to screenshot everything," Nadia said, in the calm, measured tone of someone who has heard this story before and knows it rarely ends well. "Timestamps are your best friend." archive.org, the Wayback Machine, your own metadata, everything. Everything? I repeated. Everything, Margot. Every post, every comment, every story, every reel. If she's been doing this for 11 months, there could be hundreds of instances. And if she's making money off it, the damages go up significantly. I spent that night in a state that I can only describe as furious focus. My apartment was dark, except for the blue glow of my monitor and the occasional wheeze of the Dragon radiator. I went through Serafina's entire Instagram archive, post by post, story by story, reel by reel. I found pieces I'd completely forgotten about. Early work from years ago that I'd posted on Tumblr and then abandoned. Sketches I'd shared on Twitter. Process videos I'd uploaded to YouTube. All of it, harvested and reposted by this woman I'd never met. This woman with 5 million followers and a management team and a brand deal pipeline that could rival a small corporation. By 4 a.m., I had cataloged 24/7 instances of my work appearing on her platforms. 247. That's not a mistake. That's not an accident. That's not, I found this image on Pinterest and didn't know who made it. 247 instances is a systematic, deliberate, industrial-scale operation. She had slightly altered some pieces, flipping them horizontally, changing the color saturation, cropping edges, adding filters. Minor modifications designed to evade reverse image search. Smart, in the way that a virus is smart. Adaptable, persistent, engineered to survive. But not smart enough. Because she hadn't altered the metadata on every image, and the ones she'd pulled from my YouTube videos still had frame-accurate timestamps that matched my upload dates. And because I had original files with creation dates stretching back years, and because, despite everything, I had never deleted a single piece of process work, a single sketch file, a single layer document. Artists, take note, your paranoia about backing up files is justified. Every hoarded PSD file, every external hard drive you've bought and cursed at, every redundant cloud backup, it's all worth it. Someday, it might be the only thing standing between you and someone who wants to erase you from your own story. Over the next week, I didn't sleep much. I ate toast and cereal, and occasionally remembered to drink water. My cat, Bartholomew, regarded me with the particular judgment that only cats can summon. That mixture of concern and contempt that says, I live with this creature, and she is not okay. Bartholomew is a large orange tabby with the disposition of a disappointed Victorian patriarch and the appetite of a small horse. He took to sitting on my keyboard at strategic moments, as if trying to physically prevent me from continuing my research, which, in retrospect, was probably his way of expressing concern. I dug deeper. Serafina had a presence across multiple platforms: Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Pinterest, Twitter. On TikTok, she had reposted my art as aesthetic content, set to trending audio, racking up millions of views. On YouTube, she had reaction videos where she would discover art and react to it, except the art was mine, and she presented it as though she'd found it through serendipity rather than, systematic theft. On Pinterest, she had organized boards of inspiration that were essentially curated collections of my work, mixed in enough with other artists' work to create plausible deniability. On Twitter, she posted my art in threads that gained thousands of retweets. The scope was staggering. It was like discovering that someone has been living in your house while you were at work, sleeping in your bed, wearing your clothes, and telling everyone they meet that they're you. I also discovered something else. Something that transformed this from a personal grievance into something much larger. I wasn't the only one. On a Discord server for small artists, a community I joined years ago and mostly lurked in, I found a thread. Someone named @InkwellsRaven had posted, "Has anyone else noticed that Serafina Lux's original art looks suspiciously familiar?" The thread was 3 months old and had over 200 replies. Artist after artist, most with follower counts in the hundreds or low thousands, had found their work on Serafina's page. Some had been stolen from more recently than me. Others had been stolen from for years. There was a watercolorist from Sweden named Linnea who painted delicate botanical scenes that appeared on Serafina's page as my new nature series. There was a digital artist from Brazil named Tiago who created sprawling sci-fi cityscapes that Serafina had reposted as concept art for a project I'm working on. There was a photographer from Japan named Yuki, whose moody, rain-soaked street photography had been filtered and recaptioned as my recent trip to Tokyo. There were dozens of us, maybe more. The thread was a wound that kept opening, each reply revealing another victim, another stolen piece, another instance of someone's creative labor being consumed by a woman who treated other people's art the way a black hole treats light. I direct messaged @InkwellRaven. Her real name was Priya. She was a freelance illustrator from Toronto, and she had been tracking Serafina's thefts for 6 months. She had her own spreadsheet, she had timestamps, she had the same quiet, burning fury that I did. "We should talk," I wrote. "We should," she wrote back. "I've been waiting for someone else to say that." Priya and I got on a video call the next day. She had short, dark hair, sharp eyes, and the exhausted but determined look of someone who had been fighting a battle alone for too long. Behind her, I could see a wall covered in printed screenshots, connected by red string like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. Except it wasn't a conspiracy theory. It was all true. "I've identified at least 40 artists whose work has been taken," Priya said. "Some of them don't even know yet. I've been reaching out one by one, but a lot of people are scared. They don't want to go up against someone with that much reach." "Because she'll come after them," I said. "Because she'll come after them," Priya confirmed. "She's done it before. There was a photographer last year who called her out. She posted a tearful story about how jealous people were trying to destroy her, and her fans mobilized. The photographer got doxxed, death threats. They had to shut down their accounts." The phrase fan mobilization has a particular chill to it when you've been on the internet long enough. It's not a military term, but it might as well be. 5 million people, organized by parasocial loyalty, unleashed on a single target. It's the digital equivalent of a swarm of locusts. "So, what do we do?" I asked. Priya smiled. It was a thin, sharp smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes but somehow reaches something deeper, something more dangerous. "We don't fight her on her terms," she said. "We don't post a call-out thread and hope for the best. We don't rely on the platform's reporting system because we both know how that goes, a form letter and a shrug. We build a case, a real, actual, legally airtight case, and then we release it all at once, in a format that can't be ignored, can't be dismissed, and can't be drowned out by a tearful Instagram story." "You're talking about a video," I said. "I'm talking about a video essay," Priya said. "The kind that gets millions of views, the kind that journalists pick up, the kind that sponsors can't pretend they didn't see." She had thought about this. She had thought about this a lot. And as she laid out her plan, detailed, methodical, almost surgical in its precision, I realized that Priya wasn't just another victim. Priya was someone who had been preparing for war. I want to take a moment here to talk about the economics of being a small creator on the internet, because I think it's important context. When you have 12,000 followers, you exist in a strange twilight zone. You're not nobody. You have an audience, however modest. But you're also not someone in the way that the platform's algorithms recognize. The algorithm doesn't care about you. The algorithm cares about engagement, and engagement is a numbers game that you, with your 12,000 followers, will never win against someone with 5 million. Your posts reach a few thousand people, hers reach hundreds of thousands. Your art, which took you 3 weeks, gets 200 likes. Her repost of your art, which took her 3 seconds, gets 200,000. This imbalance isn't just unfair, it's parasitic. It's a vampire economy where the biggest accounts feed on the creative output of smaller ones, growing stronger and more visible, while the original creators stagnate in the shadows. Serafina wasn't just stealing art. She was stealing the economic potential of that art. Every time she posted my work, she was taking the views, the likes, the shares, the followers, the brand deals, the sponsorship revenue that should have been mine. She was eating my future, bite by bite, post by post, and calling it her own. The video essay took us 4 months to make. 4 months that felt like living inside a pressure cooker while someone slowly turned up the heat. 4 months of meticulous research, careful documentation, and the kind of focused collaboration that forges alliances out of shared fury. Priya and I assembled a team, not a large one, we couldn't afford a large one, but a dedicated one. There was Marcus, a video editor from Chicago, who had his own grievances with content theft and offered to work for a split of any future revenue. There was June, a data analyst from Seoul, who helped us track engagement metrics and estimate the financial impact of each stolen piece. And there was Nadia, my lawyer friend, who provided legal guidance and made sure everything we included in the video was defensible. Every claim, every timestamp, every piece of evidence. Remember, Nadia told us, the goal isn't just to expose her. The goal is to create a document that is so thorough, so well-sourced, and so impossible to refute that it becomes the definitive record of what happened. Journalists should be able to take this video, write their articles, and not need to do any additional research. Sponsors should be able to watch it and immediately understand why they need to distance themselves. We titled the video, The Serafina Lux Empire, a Masterclass in Content Theft. I know what you're thinking, that's a bit on the nose. But sometimes, clarity is more important than cleverness. We wanted anyone who saw the title to know exactly what they were getting. No clickbait, no ambiguity, just the truth, presented with the confidence of someone who knows they're right. The structure was meticulous. Priya and I had debated it for weeks, arguing over pacing, over narrative arc, over how much of ourselves to reveal. In the end, we decided on a structure that was part investigative journalism, part personal essay, and part legal document. It opened with Serafina's own content. Beautiful, polished, seemingly original. We showed her most popular posts, her biggest brand deals, her most viral moments. We let the viewer see the empire as it appeared from the outside, gleaming, powerful, enviable. Then we showed the cracks. The first segment was about me. I narrated it myself, which was terrifying. I'm not a public speaker. I'm someone who communicates through illustrations, through the silent language of color and form. But Priya insisted. People need to see a face, she said. They need to hear a voice. Statistics are important, but empathy is what makes people share. So I sat in front of a camera and told my story. I talked about my art, my process, the hours and days and weeks I spent on each piece. I showed my original files with their creation dates and layer histories, and then I showed Serafina's posts with their timestamps and engagement numbers. The juxtaposition was devastating, not because I'm a particularly compelling speaker, I'm not, but because the evidence spoke for itself. Side by side, my original next to her repost, it was obvious. Unmistakable. The kind of obvious that makes you wonder how no one had noticed before. The answer, of course, was that people had noticed. Dozens of us had noticed. But noticing isn't enough when the person you're noticing has an army. The second segment was about the other artists. Priya had conducted video interviews with as many of the affected creators as possible. Linnea, the watercolorist from Sweden, spoke softly but firmly about finding her delicate botanical paintings on Serafina's page, stripped of context and credit. Tiago, the digital artist from Brazil, showed his original sci-fi cityscapes alongside Serafina's reposts, his voice tight with restrained anger. Yuki, the photographer from Japan, didn't speak. Instead, they submitted a written statement that Priya read aloud, accompanied by their photographs. Those gorgeous, melancholy images of rain on pavement and neon reflected in puddles, alongside Serafina's filtered versions. It feels like watching someone wear your skin, Yuki's statement read, not metaphorically, literally. She took my images, my perspective, my way of seeing the world, and she put her name on it, and 5 million people believed her. The third segment was about the money. This was June's contribution, and it was the segment that turned the video from a personal grievance into something with legal and financial teeth. Using publicly available data, engagement rates, estimated CPMs, disclosed sponsorship rates for similar influencer tiers, June calculated an estimated revenue range for Serafina's posts that featured stolen content. The number was staggering. Over the period we could document, roughly 18 months, though we suspected it went back further. The estimated revenue from posts containing stolen artwork was between $1.2 million and $2.8 million. Let me repeat that, between $1.2 and $2.8 million. Generated, at least in part, by artwork that did not belong to her. Artwork that she had taken, without permission, without credit, without compensation, from people who were struggling to pay rent. Marcus added visualizations to this segment. Bar graphs showing the revenue disparity between the original creators and Serafina. Timelines showing the pattern of theft, how she would wait days or sometimes weeks after an original post to repost it, giving enough distance to avoid immediate detection while still riding any viral momentum. Because Serafina hadn't just stolen content, she had actively worked to conceal her theft and punish those who discovered it. We had obtained screenshots from artists who had come forward, from archived pages, from the Wayback Machine, showing Serafina's pattern of response when confronted. First, silence. Then, if pressed, a brief acknowledgement buried in a comment section. "Oh, I found this on Pinterest. I didn't know the original artist. So sorry." Then, deletion of the comment and sometimes the post, followed by a new post days later with a different stolen piece. And then there were the cases where she didn't apologize, where she or her management team went on the offensive. The photographer who had been doxxed, a collage artist who had received a cease and desist letter from Serafina's lawyers, claiming that their attempt to expose the theft constituted defamation. A teenager in the Philippines who had made a TikTok about the theft and had been bombarded with hateful messages from Serafina's fans, to the point of deleting their account and seeking therapy. This segment was the one that made me feel something beyond anger. It made me feel cold. The systematic nature of it, the way she had built not just a content empire but a defense apparatus to protect it, was chilling in its efficiency. The fifth and final segment was about what we were going to do about it, not a vague call to action, not a "please share this video" plea, but a specific, concrete set of demands and next steps. We were filing a copyright infringement lawsuit. Nadia had spent weeks preparing the complaint, and it was a thing of legal beauty. 57 pages of detailed allegations, supported by hundreds of pages of exhibits, each stolen piece documented with original files, timestamps, and metadata. We were seeking statutory damages under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which provides for damages of up to $150,000 per willful infringement. 247 instances, up to $150,000 each. The maximum potential damages were, in the language of my spreadsheet, a number so large it becomes abstract. We were also sending notification letters to every brand that had sponsored Serafina's posts featuring stolen content. The letter was straightforward. Your brand was associated with stolen artwork. Here is the evidence. Please be advised that continued association may expose your company to legal liability. And we were submitting formal complaints to Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and every other platform where Serafina operated, with our complete evidence package attached. The video was 47 minutes long. Marcus had edited it with the precision of a watchmaker and the pacing of a thriller. Every transition was deliberate. Every piece of evidence was presented clearly, with timestamps and source links burned into the frame so they couldn't be cropped out or disputed. He added subtle visual motifs throughout, a crack spreading across a screen, a mirror slowly shattering, that gave the whole thing the quality of a dark fairy tale, which felt appropriate given the subject matter. We uploaded it on a Thursday evening, Eastern Time. We'd chosen Thursday because our research suggested that was when internet engagement peaked. People settling into the end of their week, tired enough to watch long-form content but not yet checked out for the weekend. We uploaded it to YouTube and simultaneously posted a thread on Twitter with a summary and key clips. Priya handled the Twitter thread. I handled the YouTube description and metadata. Marcus hit publish, and we all stared at the screen like it was a bomb we'd just lit. Within the first hour, the video had 500 views. Within 3 hours, 5,000. By midnight, it had 50,000. I went to bed that night with my phone buzzing like a trapped wasp, and the strange, floating sensation of someone standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down, and realizing they've already jumped. I woke up the next morning to 300,000 views. My phone had died overnight from the sheer volume of notifications. When I plugged it in and rebooted, the notifications cascaded in like a waterfall. Emails, direct messages, comments, tags. The video was being shared everywhere. Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, Tumblr, Discord servers I'd never heard of. News outlets were picking it up. A tech journalist named David Chen, who wrote for The Verge, had already published an article with the headline, "Mega Influencer Serafina Lux Accused of Systematic Art Theft in Devastating Video Essay." The article was thorough. David had clearly watched the entire 47 minutes, and he'd done his own independent verification of several key claims before publishing. He'd reached out to Serafina's management team for comment and received a terse email stating that, "These allegations are without merit, and we are reviewing our legal options." Within 48 hours, the video had 2 million views. The hashtag Serafina Lux was trending on Twitter, but not in the way Serafina was used to. The conversation had shifted. The empire was trembling. Let me tell you about what happened next, because this is the part that I find most interesting. And by interesting, I mean deeply satisfying in a way that I'm not entirely proud of. The sponsors went first. Within 3 days of the video's release, 7 of Serafina's major brand partners had issued public statements distancing themselves from her. A makeup company called Velura was the first. "We take intellectual property rights seriously and have suspended our partnership with Serafina Lux, pending further investigation." Then a fashion label, then a tech brand, then a subscription box service, then a skincare company, then a meal delivery service. Then, in what felt like the final nail, a luxury car brand that had featured Serafina in a major campaign just 2 months prior. Each statement was slightly different in tone, but they all said the same thing. "We are running away from this as fast as our corporate legs can carry us." Because nobody wants to be associated with theft. Nobody wants their brand mentioned in the same breath as a 47-minute video essay that has been viewed by millions of people and shared by journalists around the world. The financial impact on Serafina was immediate and severe. Influencer revenue is a delicate ecosystem. It relies on a constant flow of brand deals, and brand deals rely on a clean public image. When that image gets contaminated, the money doesn't just slow down, it stops, cold, like a river meeting a dam. I know this because Nadia kept track. Through public disclosures, industry contacts, and the inevitable gossip mill of the influencer marketing world, we learned that Serafina lost an estimated $400,000 in pending sponsorships within the first week alone, canceled campaigns, pulled collaborations, revoked invitations to events. $400,000 in 1 week, because she couldn't be bothered to credit the artists whose work she was profiting from. The platforms responded next, though their response was characteristically slow and inadequate. Instagram removed 23 of the infringing posts we'd flagged. Not all of them, far from it, but enough to create a noticeable gap in her feed, a missing teeth quality that undermined the curated perfection she'd spent years building. TikTok was slightly more aggressive, perhaps because the video had gained particular traction there. They removed a dozen videos and issued a strike against Serafina's account, a formal warning that too many strikes would result in permanent removal. YouTube was the most cautious, waiting a full 2 weeks before demonetizing several of her videos that contained stolen content. None of this was enough, of course. The platforms had allowed this to happen for years, and their belated, piecemeal responses were the institutional equivalent of closing the barn door after the horse had not just left, but moved to another country and started a new life under an assumed name. But it mattered. Each removal, each demonetization, each strike was a chip in the facade, and the facade was all she had. Serafina herself remained silent for 6 days. 6 days is an eternity on the internet. It's approximately 600 years in influencer time. During those 6 days, the narrative solidified around the video essay. Every article, every thread, every discussion referenced our evidence. There was no competing narrative. There was no alternative interpretation. There was just the truth, sitting there in plain sight, undeniable and unignorable. On the seventh day, Serafina posted a video. I watched it live, because of course I did. Because some part of me needed to see it, the way you need to look at a wound to understand how deep it goes. She was sitting in what appeared to be her living room, all white walls and carefully placed plants, and the kind of minimalist aesthetic that costs approximately $50,000 to achieve. She was wearing a simple white t-shirt, no makeup, her eyes were red. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Hey guys, she said, I owe you an apology. I owe a lot of people an apology. She spoke for 12 minutes. She cried. She talked about her creative process and how she had lost track of where inspiration ended and appropriation began. She said she had a team that managed her content and that she trusted them to source properly. She said she was deeply sorry and that she would be taking time away to reflect and learn. She did not name a single artist she had stolen from. She did not offer to compensate anyone. She did not acknowledge the specific, documented, systematic nature of the theft. She did not mention the video essay, the lawsuit, or the dozens of creators whose work she had taken. It was an apology in the vaguest possible sense, a non-apology apology. The kind of carefully crafted statement that says, I'm sorry you feel that way, without ever admitting that you did anything wrong. The internet was not impressed. The comments on her video were brutal, a tidal wave of anger and mockery, and, most damagingly, links to our video essay. Before you accept this apology, watch this. One comment read, with a time-stamped link. She talks about inspiration, but she literally copy-pasted this artist's work and claimed it as her own. Another comment, her team? She tags herself as the artist in every single post. Hashtag, not your team, hashtag, not your art. Another, this is the most generic, non-specific apology I've ever seen. She couldn't even name one artist, not one. Watch the video essay, it's 47 minutes of evidence. This woman is a thief. Serafina deleted the apology video within hours. But the internet never forgets. Multiple people had downloaded it, re-uploaded it, and clipped it. The apology became its own meme, a shorthand for the performative contrition of influencers who get caught doing something wrong. The lawsuit moved forward. Nadia filed the complaint in federal court, and it was, if I may say so, a thing of terrifying legal beauty. 57 pages, 312 exhibits, 43 artists named as plaintiffs, with the option for more to join. Serafina's lawyers responded with a motion to dismiss, arguing that our claims were speculative and that social media content creation involves a complex ecosystem of sharing and inspiration that cannot be reduced to simple claims of ownership. The judge denied the motion. In his ruling, he noted that the plaintiffs have presented extensive documentary evidence of direct copying, including original files with verifiable creation dates, metadata analysis, and clear patterns of systematic reproduction. This is not a case about inspiration. This is a case about theft. I want to pause here and tell you about the strangest thing that happened during this whole saga, because in the middle of all the chaos, the viral video, the sponsor withdrawals, the lawsuit, the media coverage, something unexpected happened to me. My follower count exploded. On the day we uploaded the video, I had about 12,000 followers. A week later, I had 200,000. A month later, I had over 1 million. People were finding my art through the video essay. They were going to my profile, seeing my work, and following me. Not out of pity, though there was some of that, but because they genuinely responded to what I created. The video had shown my art in context with the full weight of my process and my story behind it, and people connected with it in a way that the algorithm had never allowed before. My print shop sold out in 48 hours. I had to enlist help to fulfill orders. Freelance inquiries flooded my inbox. A gallery in New York reached out about a solo exhibition. A publisher asked if I'd be interested in illustrating a children's book. It was absurd. It was like being buried alive and then having someone dig you up and hand you a bouquet of flowers. I was grateful, obviously. I was also angry, because this is what should have happened years ago if someone hadn't been siphoning off my visibility and my audience. I thought about all the opportunities I'd missed, all the connections that had been hijacked, all the moments when a potential client or collaborator had scrolled past my work on Serafina's page and moved on, never knowing that the artist they might have hired was right there, hiding in plain sight, obscured by someone else's name. But mostly, I was focused, because the lawsuit wasn't just about money, it was about precedent. It was about creating a legal framework that would make it harder for the next Serafina Lux to do what Serafina Lux had done. The discovery phase of the lawsuit was illuminating. Through the legal process, we obtained internal communications from Serafina's team, emails, messages, planning documents, and what we found was, in a word, damning. There were emails between Serafina and her content manager discussing sourcing artwork from lesser-known accounts to keep the feed fresh without spending on original content creation. There were spreadsheets tracking which artists to take from, how long to wait before reposting, and which posts had generated the most engagement and revenue. There was a message from Serafina herself in a group chat with her team that read, "Just make sure you change the colors a bit so reverse image search doesn't catch it. LOL." The lol, at the end, that casual little laugh, was the most enraging thing I've ever read. It reduced years of creative labor to a lark, a joke, a minor inconvenience to be bypassed with a hue adjustment. There were also messages discussing the photographer who had been doxxed. Serafina's social media manager had suggested letting the fans handle it, and Serafina had responded with a thumbs-up emoji. A thumbs-up emoji, as though coordinating a harassment campaign against someone who caught you stealing was as mundane as approving a lunch order. These communications were devastating to Serafina's legal position. They demonstrated not just knowledge of the theft, but active, deliberate intent. They showed a pattern of criminal consciousness, a legal term that I learned from Nadia, and that essentially means, yes, they knew exactly what they were doing, and yes, they did it anyway. The settlement negotiations began in earnest after the discovery phase. Serafina's lawyers, who had started with bluster and denial, were now in full damage control mode. The internal communications had shifted the calculus entirely. This was no longer a case they could spin as misunderstanding or inspiration gone wrong. This was a case they could lose, and lose publicly, and lose catastrophically. I won't disclose the exact settlement amount because of the non-disclosure agreement, which is a real thing that real lawyers include in real settlements and not just a plot device from legal dramas. But I will say this. It was enough that every artist named in the lawsuit received a meaningful payment. Not life-changing for everyone, but significant. Enough to acknowledge the harm. Enough to say, this mattered. What was taken from you mattered. Additionally, Serafina was required to issue a formal, specific apology that named every artist whose work she had stolen. Not a generic video, not a tearful monologue about inspiration. A written statement, published on every platform, that listed each artist by name, described what was taken, and acknowledged the harm. She was also required to permanently delete all infringing content and agree to a consent decree that imposed financial penalties for any future copyright infringement. The consent decree was, in Nadia's words, almost unprecedented in an influencer case. It meant that if Serafina ever stole content again, the penalties would be automatic and severe. And she was required to complete a course on copyright law, an actual, accredited, university-level course, with a final exam. I found this detail oddly satisfying. The image of Serafina Lux sitting in a classroom, taking notes on the basics of intellectual property, perhaps for the first time in her life. The aftermath was strange. The internet moved on, as the internet does, to the next scandal, the next outrage, the next 15-minute spectacle. But the impact of what happened lingered in ways that were both visible and invisible. Serafina's follower count dropped from 5 million to just over 1 million in the months following the video's release. She attempted a comeback, of course. They always do. She rebranded slightly, less artist, more lifestyle creator. She posted content about her healing journey and her growth. She collaborated with smaller creators and made a point of tagging and crediting everyone. But the shadow of the video essay followed her everywhere. Every post, no matter how innocuous, had comments linking to the video. Every collaboration was scrutinized for signs of exploitation. Every apology was compared to the non-apology that had become a meme. The video essay itself continued to gain views, eventually surpassing 8 million. It became a reference point in discussions about content theft, intellectual property, and the ethics of influence. Journalism schools used it as a case study. Legal blogs cited it in articles about the DMESCA. Artists linked to it in their own posts about attribution and credit. Priya and I talked about making a follow-up. Where are they now update, but we decided against it. The story had been told. The evidence had been presented. The consequences had been, if not perfectly just, then at least meaningful. There was no need to keep kicking the hornet's nest. I did keep in touch with some of the other artists. Linnea, the watercolorist from Sweden, saw her own following grow substantially after the video. She was able to quit her part-time job and focus on her art full-time. She sent me a painting once, a small watercolor of a red telephone box overgrown with bioluminescent moss. My telephone box. Painted back to me by someone I'd never met, as a gift, as a thank you. I hung it in my bathroom, where the dragon radiator can keep it warm. Thiago, the digital artist from Brazil, used his portion of the settlement to fund a graphic novel. He sent me a draft copy, and it was extraordinary, vivid, imaginative, bursting with the kind of energy that can only come from someone who has been given the freedom to create without fear. Yuki, the photographer from Japan, quietly rebuilt their online presence. They never regained the momentum they'd lost, but they found a new, smaller community that valued their work for what it was. They told me, in an email, that the experience had changed their relationship with photography. I shoot for myself now, they wrote. Not for the feed, not for the algorithm, for the moment. It's enough. I think about Yuki's email a lot. I think about what it means to create something and have it taken from you, and then to decide to keep creating anyway. Not because you've forgiven, but because creating is who you are, and you can't stop being yourself just because someone tried to steal you. That, I think, is the real revenge. Not the lawsuit, not the video, not the sponsors fleeing like rats from a burning building. The real revenge is that every single one of us, the 43 artists named in the lawsuit, and the dozens more who came forward afterward, kept making art. We kept creating, we kept putting ourselves into our work, even though we now knew, more intimately than we'd ever wanted to, how easily that work could be taken. If you're a small creator reading this, and you've found your work on someone else's page, I want you to know something. You are not powerless. The system is not designed to protect you. It's designed to protect the platforms and the powerful. But you have tools. You have timestamps and metadata and original files. You have the DMSCA. You have the right to file a lawsuit. And you have each other. That's what I learned from this experience, more than anything else. The individual artists Serafina stole from were, alone, easy targets. Easy to ignore. Easy to overwhelm. But together, we were something she couldn't dismiss, couldn't silence, couldn't drown out with a tearful Instagram story, and an army of parasocially loyal fans. There is power in numbers. There is power in evidence. There is power in taking the time to be thorough, to be meticulous, to build something so solid that it can't be knocked down by a PR crisis management team. And there is power in the truth. The simple, undeniable, time-stamped truth. I still draw. I still post my art online, though I'm more careful now about where and how. I watermark everything. I keep meticulous records. I check reverse image search regularly, the way some people check the weather. My follower count has stabilized at around 1.3 million, which is a number so large it still feels like it belongs to someone else. I have a literary agent now, and a gallery representation, and more freelance work than I can reasonably accept. The dragon radiator still wheezes. Bartholomew still judges me. The walls are still the color of old cream. But something has changed. Not in my apartment, which is stubbornly the same. Not in my process, which is still slow and labor-intensive and prone to periods of creative despair. Not even in my relationship with the internet, which remains a complicated mix of gratitude and wariness. What's changed is that I no longer feel invisible. For years, I poured myself into my work and sent it out into the world like a message in a bottle, hoping someone, somewhere, would find it and understand. Most of the time, it felt like the bottle just drifted, unopened, into the vast and indifferent ocean of content that is the modern internet. Now, people have found the bottle, they've read the message, and they've written back. That doesn't erase what Serafina did. Nothing will ever erase it. The theft happened, and the money was made, and the harm was real, and no amount of settlement or apology or legal precedent can fully restore the years of creative labor that were consumed by someone else's ambition. But it does mean something. It means that the truth, when presented with care and precision and unflinching honesty, has power. It means that the small and the quiet and the overlooked can, under the right circumstances and with the right allies, bring down something very large and very loud and very sure of its own invincibility. It means that art matters, not just as content, not just as engagement bait, not just as raw material for someone else's empire. Art matters because it is the expression of a human mind, and taking it without permission is a violation of something that cannot be fully quantified in a legal complaint or a settlement agreement. Serafina Lux is still online. She posts less frequently now, and her engagement is a fraction of what it was. Her brand deals have dried up. Her management team has, according to industry gossip, dropped her. She recently posted a selfie with the caption, "New Chapter," and it received 12,000 likes, which for a former mega-influencer is the equivalent of playing to an empty theater. I don't check her page often. When I do, it's not with anger or satisfaction or even curiosity. It's more like looking at a ruin, a building that was once magnificent and is now crumbling, slowly, in full view of everyone who passes by. She built her empire on other people's work. She decorated it with their art, their photographs, their creative visions. She invited 5 million people inside and told them it was all hers. And for a while, they believed her. But empires built on sand, or in this case, on stolen pixels, don't last. They can't. Because the foundation is false, and eventually, the weight of the lie becomes too heavy, and the whole thing comes down. I'm not a vengeful person by nature. I'm an illustrator. I draw moths and fog women and foxes with reading glasses. I live in an apartment with a dragon radiator and a judgmental cat. I eat too much toast and I don't drink enough water, and I stay up too late drawing things that may or may not be dogs or potatoes. But I believe in justice, not the dramatic, cinematic kind where the hero delivers a speech and the villain breaks down in tears. The quieter kind, the kind that happens in courtrooms and spreadsheets and 47-minute video essays. The kind that takes 4 months of meticulous work and years of quietly collected evidence, and the courage to stand up and say, "This is mine. You took it, and I'm taking it back." If you've made it this far, thank you for reading. If you're an artist, protect your work. If you're a consumer of art, credit the artists you share. And if you're a mega-influencer who's been stealing from small creators for years, well, check your timestamps, because we're checking ours. The lighthouse keeper's daughter is still standing on that cliff. Her dress is still made of waves. Her eyes are still glowing faintly amber, and she is still, and always will be, mine. Edit. A lot of people are asking about the video essay link. I'll leave it here. It's still up. It's still accurate, and as of this edit, it's been viewed over 8 million times. That's more views than Serafina's apology video got. Draw your own conclusions. Edit 2. No, I will not be doing an AMA. I'm an illustrator, not a public speaker. The video was hard enough. Please go look at my art instead. That's the part I'm actually proud of. Edit 3. To the person who DM'd me asking if I feel bad about ruining Serafina's life, no, I don't. She ruined dozens of lives, including mine, and profited from it. Consequences are not cruelty, they're consequences. Edit 4. Bartholomew says hi. Edit 5. Fine. Here's a picture of Bartholomew. He's on my desk, sitting on my tablet, preventing me from working. Some things never change. He looks exactly as judgmental as you'd imagine. Orange fur, green eyes, the expression of a king surveying a kingdom that has deeply disappointed him.